Many fans were disappointed with Halo 5's story, and there are certainly a variety of reasons for that sentiment. Split campaigns with 2 playable Spartan teams, a major change in character for Cortana, and limited character development are some of the many factors. This is Noble Actual, and today I'll be discussing what Halo 5's campaign got wrong. Before getting into it, I should mention that these are just my opinions, and while I feel many of these are broadly shared by fans, I'm sure some feel differently. Whether you agree or disagree with my points, be sure to give your thoughts in the comments below, as I'd love to discuss. Additionally, while I have many issues with the story and direction, it's not a bad game entirely, and I may do another video about what they got right in the future. With that said, let's get into it. We'll start with the introduction of Blue Team and Fireteam Osiris. Not the concept of having a split campaign, we'll get to that, but specifically the way these characters were introduced and developed. With Halo 5, we now had 8 characters to follow throughout the campaign, 4 per team, which brings the narrative challenge of developing all 8 characters and making us care about them, which I feel was one of the biggest failings of Halo 5. We start with Fireteam Osiris. Our opening cutscene reveals Locke, Buck, Vale, and Tanaka. We get an introduction to Locke in Halo Nightfall and a bit in the Master Chief Collection, so we know who he is from external media. But that means players are expected to have watched Nightfall before playing Halo 5, which was not a good show, but that's besides the point. The game is working from an assumption that you already know who he is. Moving on to Buck, they assume you know him as well, but there it's a bit more reasonable because he is a fan favorite from a previous game, not a piece of promotional material or external narrative. Most do know who he is, and even if you don't, he's charismatic enough that you'd probably still like him. My biggest issue though is with Vale and Tanaka. As a player, or even a fan who vaguely keeps up with the universe outside of the main games, you have no clue who they are, and I feel Halo 5 does a terrible job of addressing that. Cutscenes give you nearly nothing about these characters. Their development is almost entirely through in-game dialogue, a few brief conversations here and there. In fact, probably the most you get on them is Cortana reading off their personnel files to taunt them in the final mission. Ultimately, to me, Osiris, with the exception of Buck, felt weak. More or less empty husks to allow for a co-op or vaguely squad-based game. Locke is fine, I don't dislike him and he has good qualities, but as someone 343 wanted to push as a major character who takes up 12 of the 15 missions in Halo 5, that's just not good enough. Then we move on to Blue Team. Now, as before, if you've read the books and followed the universe outside of the games, then you probably know and love them. However, again, 343 is relying on you knowing who they are prior to the game. The second mission, our very first introduction to Fred, Kelly, and Linda in a Halo game, gives very little. From context, you understand that they're close to the Chief, and later there's more in-game dialogue on the Osiris side revealing that they grew up together and are basically family, but it's too little and it's too subtle. Even as someone who loves Blue Team, and honestly, their cutscenes are amazing, I am thrilled to see them in the game, the characters felt underutilized. While Blue Team is much better than Osiris, mainly because I already know them from the books, they still feel like they're only there for the purpose of having a squad. They aren't really integral to the story, they get little attention, and we don't end the game knowing much more about them than we did at the start. If the game had followed the Chief and Blue Team entirely, then that likely would have been different. Which leads me to my next point, split campaigns. Halo 2 is arguably my favorite game, possibly of all time, although admittedly that's because it was the first Halo game I properly played and fell in love with, so I am absolutely biased there. But Halo 2 had a split story, and even despite the major development hurdles that Bungie had with the game, I still feel it has a great campaign. As such, I try to give 343 some credit here. I like that they tried it, and I'm not against the idea, but there are a number of reasons why I don't think it worked. In Halo 2, we got to see 2 vastly different perspectives, especially at the start. These campaigns were different worlds entirely. The Arbiter's story took us into the Covenant, gave us a glimpse into their inner workings, and helped us understand and even empathize with an alien we otherwise saw as an enemy. By the end of the game, these 2 stories came together, and it served to make Halo 3 much richer. In my view, Halo 2's dual campaigns served a valuable purpose and enriched the universe. In contrast, Osiris is another Spartan squad. Sure, their perspective and experiences are different, and the purpose was to get us an outside view into Cortana's actions. But they're Spartans, they're human, they serve on the Infinity, ultimately not all that different. Essentially a less awesome version of Blue Team with characters we mostly don't know who get little development. This makes the split campaign much less compelling or valuable to the narrative. Not only that, Osiris took up 80% of the missions in Halo 5. Now that's not an exact ratio in game time, but in raw mission count, that's what it is. So calling it a split campaign is unfair to begin with. How on earth they thought giving the Chief just 3 missions in a mainline Halo game was a good idea, I will never know. Going back to the Halo 2 comparison, which by the way had 8 missions for the Chief and 7 for the Arbiter, which includes cutscene missions and isn't an exact ratio once again, but just an example, that game also had far less characters to juggle. The split campaign in Halo 5 further compounds the character development problems that it already has. There were 2 entire teams to meet, again 8 consistent characters, plus Cortana, Halsey, and the Arbiter all needing development, which is tough to do. If the game had focused on Blue Team, we would have had a more reasonable character count. Not only could we have gotten to know them much better, but I think it would have been more compelling overall. One of the best parts of the Osiris campaign is going to St. Helios and fighting alongside the Arbiter, even if briefly. But imagine if that had been the Chief and Blue Team instead of Locke and Osiris. With the Chief and the Arbiter's long history, that segment would have been so much more impactful. Next, let's talk about Cortana. The issues with character development I just discussed are fairly objective. Without needing to be a fan, I think many could agree that the way these characters were introduced and developed wasn't great. With Cortana, it's less of an objective or factual issue, and more me as a fan being extremely unhappy with the direction they've taken her. Because of this, I didn't start the video with this point, even though for me personally it is my biggest frustration with the game, and the one that just bothers me the most because I feel it damages a character I love and disrespects previous work, even 343's own work in Halo 4, where I feel they handled the Chief and Cortana beautifully. Halo 5 had a huge change in direction for Cortana's character, and in my view, it's not at all adequately explained or justified. She's not rampant anymore, the domain apparently cured her, so it's hard to use that as a justification for any actions. Instead, we're led to believe that after accessing the domain and meeting the Warden Eternal, that she now truly believes she must bear the mantle of responsibility, and that unleashing the Guardians on the galaxy is the best option. Nothing in past games or books, to my knowledge, supports that she would ever act this way. Her care for John is about the only aspect of her character that remained, but even then, her reunion with the Chief after the very emotional events of Halo 4 and him thinking she was dead for the past year lasts all of about 2 minutes, before she locks him in a cryptum intending to keep him and Blue Team there for 10,000 years. She barely explains her plans or tries to convince or reason with him, or even just talk. After everything they had been through together, when they finally had a chance to see each other again, she essentially plays games with him and then locks him up to get him out of the way. I don't believe these actions fit her character, and there definitely was not enough explanation for the change. I certainly don't think she'd have been so cheerful about the idea of a violent, forced peace. And I also think she would have taken the Chief's opinions to heart, or at least had a proper discussion. She was willing to sacrifice herself for him and humanity multiple times, most notably staying behind on High Charity in Halo 2, as well as using her last bit of strength to help John defeat the Didact in Halo 4 and then protect him from the blast. We've come to know and love her over 4 games and multiple books, so we're invested, and this iteration just doesn't match up, and for me it feels like a betrayal of her character. By the last mission, Cortana also seems to exhibit a degree of hatred. The way she toys with Osiris and taunts them, insults them, it goes well beyond a need for forced peace. There is little sense of moral righteousness there or even professionalism. She's just being mean. This may be because they're Spartan 4s. It could also be related to feelings towards Dr. Halsey, which I don't think are justified either, or maybe a psychological tactic to delay them as she was actually worried. But regardless, to me, it's not in keeping with her character. In fairness, I would imagine 343 had a good idea of where the story goes from here in Halo 6, and that may well have included a greater understanding of her motivations that perhaps made sense, but I have trouble seeing any way I'd be satisfied with the outcome on this current course. In truth, I'm worried that Halo 5 may have done irreparable harm to her character and the relationship with the Chief, which to me is an essential part of our mainline Halo games. But I'm still holding out hope that they can course correct in Halo 6. Moving past Cortana, there are some other areas where previously established characters and story elements are disregarded or have poor continuity from Halo 4. The first example is Jul 'Mdama. To make Fireteam Osiris seem badass, they take out the leader of the Covenant in the very first mission of the game. In a cutscene, of course, which is a whole other issue 343 has. And it wasn't even their primary objective. This guy was built up in Halo 4, particularly Spartan Ops, and then just killed off immediately. Dr. Halsey's Spartan Ops story shared a similar fate, the main elements sidelined to comics and essentially tossed aside with no mention in Halo 5. There were no references to the Librarian incident from Halo 4 either, which I felt was pretty significant as she claims that the Chief, his armor, and even Cortana were seeded into human DNA, and that he was the culmination of 1,000 lifetimes of planning. That seems like a major revelation that would have recurring significance. It's quite possible that this is something that would resurface in Halo 6, and if we look at Halo 5 as a bridge title intended mainly just to set up Halo 6, some of these things make more sense, but it feels like there's no payoff. It is worth noting that the lead writer and narrative director from Halo 4, Chris Schlurf, apologies for the pronunciation, did not stay on for Halo 5, so this may have been a factor in some of these changes and the lack of cohesion. Although the narrative lead on Halo 5, Brian Reed, did write Halo 4's Spartan Ops, so part of me is a little surprised those storylines were disregarded. For what it's worth, Brian Reed has also left 343 in 2017, so perhaps we can hope for new direction in Halo 6, although writing would have likely been in the works for some time prior to his departure, at least I would imagine. There are a number of other issues I had originally noted to discuss, such as the Warden and some trends I'm not a fan of, like overuse of cutscenes, gameplay and level design choices, etc., but these aren't as significant, nor are they Halo 5 specific. I may do future videos on them, but here I wanted to focus on my major complaints. In closing, I want to reiterate that I don't think it's a bad game, but I do feel the campaign has a lot of flaws, and as a longtime fan, there are some issues and choices I have trouble letting go of. This video isn't intended to attack the game or 343 though. I love Halo to death, I just thought the ball was dropped here and I want to see it do better. Once again, please leave your thoughts in the comments below, I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, I'm just getting started on this channel and we'll have lots more to come. With that, thank you very much for watching, this has been Noble Actual, and I'll see you in the next one.